mindfulness teacher with the Mindfulness Association, and I'm going to talk a little bit about Level 1 mindfulness, which is called Being Present. And this is the first course that a participant would enroll onto if they came to the Mindfulness Association for mindfulness training. So it might be really useful to know a bit more about what mindfulness is and what the importance of being present is. So we find ourselves in our lives very often distracted, and what happens in our minds? Our minds go over and over past events, and sometimes we anticipate a lot about the future and what might happen. And when we go over the past events, it's like we're recycling what happened, and in some way we maybe don't feel comfortable with it, and we feel like maybe we said the wrong thing to our boss, for example, and what goes through our mind is, oh, I've done the wrong thing, now what are they going to think? How can I make it better? Maybe I'm a bad person, maybe I'm not fit for this job, and it can escalate until eventually you can imagine, if I'm thinking like that, what am I going to feel like? I'm going to start to feel stressed, and maybe I'll start to even turn against myself because I'm not happy with how I am. And that all comes from thinking about the past. And then what about if we're thinking about the future? We might worry a lot. We might keep thinking, I need to be good enough, I need to be better, I need to be more intelligent, I need to be this, I need to be that, and I need to be organized, and there's so many ideas we have about how we should be, and we plan to try to make ourselves fit these ideas. And I can feel just talking about it, there's a tension in my shoulders. It's quite stressful. So we tend to anxiously think about the future a lot. So these are just a few examples of what can happen in our minds. And what we do in our mindfulness training is we learn how to notice what's happening when it's happening. And just noticing is a very powerful thing, because when we notice, we start to question, do we need to be this way with ourselves? Do we need to think in this kind of a way? And when we notice and we take stock, then we find that there's a choice, and maybe we can do things a bit differently. Maybe we can notice that thinking's happening, and instead of being completely swept away in the tide of that thinking, we can come back and we can rest into how things actually are in this moment. And often it's all a bit more simple and a bit more open-ended than we usually feel. When we find ourselves more in the present moment, there's a lot more possibility to choose how we are and how our lives go forward. So if we can learn to bring our attention into the present moment with the help of maybe using the breath and coming into a sense of our physical body being here, coming into an awareness of the environment that we're in and what's happening, unfolding around us. If we're able to do that, then we can slowly cultivate a new way of being, a new way of moving through our lives, and a new way of being with ourselves. And this way of being is often much, much more focused on our well-being, and we're able to make decisions that are helpful for us and helpful for others in our lives and helpful for the world at large. So in this way we can see that although mindfulness is quite subtle and it begins with just noticing what's happening in our minds, when we really look into it, it's something quite powerful, and it can really change people's experience of their lives and bring new meaning and help them to understand how suffering happens and find ways to be much more kind and gentle with the suffering that we experience. And then if we're able to do that, it helps us to not escalate the difficulties we find in our lives, because a lot of the difficulties that we experience are actually due to reacting to what we find because it's difficult, and then we add more layers of reaction and things get more and more stuck. So we can see there that mindfulness is also a way of learning how to skillfully intervene when we're experiencing difficulties in our lives. So there's so much potential in mindfulness, and it's now been researched in quite a lot of detail, that many people from many different backgrounds with many different reasons for coming to mindfulness will find that it's very, very helpful and can really help them to move into a fuller way of living and move into more of the potential of who they are in their particular unique way. This is level 1 mindfulness, and you might wonder, what will you encounter when you first arrive at a mindfulness weekend, because most of the courses we offer are weekend courses. So there's usually a group of people. It could be anything from 12 to 40 or 50 people. And we'll all gather together, and there'll be a few teachers there, and we have some time spent where the teachers are explaining and sharing experiences of the practices and facilitating the group to gain an understanding of how to practice mindfulness. And then there's times when the teachers will guide practices. So everybody goes quiet, and we have a mindfulness bell. So we ring the bell at the beginning, and then we ring the bell at the end. And in between the two bells, there's a period of time where we really immerse ourselves in practicing mindfulness with guidance. And then after that, we spend some time discussing and inquiring into the experiences that we've had. Because when we do that, we find that we can gain some insight, and it's almost like untangling the inner world and teasing out what's really happening there, and we can learn a huge amount from sharing that with others. We learn as much from the group as we do from the teachers often with mindfulness courses. So that's a little snapshot of what you might be able to expect. But really the fullness of this journey, the uniqueness of the journey will be down to you as a mindfulness participant and how you integrate it into your life. So that's really exciting. It's very inspiring to begin this journey and see what happens, because there's so much potential there. Our mindfulness trainings at the Mindfulness Association are quite unique in a particular way, in that they include a more explicit focus on compassion from the start. So even in the mindfulness course, we look at compassion from the beginning and begin to cultivate compassion. And then when we move into level 2, we really focus in on compassion. But this is compassion in a mindful sense. So mindfulness is still our foundation, and compassion is a way of building on our mindfulness practice. So it's a similar kind of feel. It's still mindful compassion, but we really learn about how we can be kind to ourselves, and if we're kind to ourselves, then we'll be more able to be kind to others as well. So there are 4 weekends of compassion, and after that you can even go on, and there's a level 3 and a level 4, but you can watch a separate video about those. Another option at the end of the 4 weekends of the level 1 is to go on to teaching skills. So you might find out about the introduction to teaching skills modules, and there's 2 of those. And after that there's an MBLC retreat, it's called, and that's a more intensive training program for teachers. So there's a pathway that the Mindfulness Level 1 Being Present course is the start of, towards becoming a mindfulness teacher as well. I talked a little bit about how I think mindfulness is very empowering, and that comes from my own personal experience, because mindfulness was something that I came upon at a time in my life when I really, really needed it. And I think this is the case for a lot of people that I now teach. that there's a reason why we end up on a mindfulness course. We're really needing something. And so I was living and working in London in my 20s, and I started to suffer from chronic pain. I got constant headaches that were very disabling. And over time, after exploring lots and lots of avenues, everything from various neurologists that I went to see, all the way to something like acupuncture and homeopathy. I tried all these things. Nothing seemed to help. And eventually someone recommended that I try mindfulness. So I went to a retreat centre called the Holy Isle, which is off the west coast of Scotland. And I did a week-long retreat. And I just had the feeling that this might be offering me something that could help. And I ended up going back to the Holy Isle as a volunteer cook, and I stayed for 6 years on the island. And during that time, I spent a lot of time immersed in mindfulness practice and learned from a lot of teachers, including Rob Nairn, who initiated the Mindfulness Association. And over the many hours that I spent meditating in my little hut on Holy Isle with a view of the sea, I began to understand how the pain that I was experiencing in my body was due in part to the way I was holding my body and to the way I was holding my muscles. And I noticed how my attitudes and my thinking processes affected all the little muscles especially in my neck and my shoulders, and even in my stomach. If there's tension in my stomach, then somehow everything above my stomach seems to get tense. So over time I realized that if I was able to soften the tension in these different parts of my body, then things would somehow kind of realign themselves, and my body learned a new way to hold itself. And now I find that although I still get a little bit of chronic pain, I'm generally not disabled by it, and I have ways of managing it. And so mindfulness has given me back my freedom in life to pursue a full existence, really. And that's not been a quick fix, because mindfulness, although sometimes it's portrayed as something that can kind of click your fingers, do some mindfulness and you're better, actually it takes some application, and it can take time, because these patterns are very deeply ingrained in us. And we need to really spend a lot of time noticing what's happening in order to find that things can change.